So this is droplet under extreme conditions. And why I mentioned shocking story, because it is droplet encountering a shock. Okay, so the first three videos, what it should supposed to show, let me see if it shows here. And here. And here. At least the last one is plain. So that is what happens to a droplet when it encounters a shock. These two are also supposed to show the same thing. Okay, so these are why these three fluids are there, because one is DI water, which is Newtonian. Then you have a polymeric fluid, which is viscoelastic. And lastly, you have liquid metal, which is Newtonian still, but with certain properties. All right. So the background and motivation, without going into too much details, it's all there. We already know that why droplet atomization is particularly important, because while we are not dealing with primary atomization here, we are dealing with mostly secondary atomization. And secondary atomization, as you know, has a role in combustion efficiency all the way up to spray drying, right? And by this time, after listening to so many talks, we already know that in droplet atomization, two numbers are particularly important, the Weber number and the Onsorge number, and the Reynolds number thrown in for good measures. We will also show in polymeric fluids, there is certain other numbers also, which plays a significant role. Right? And this is more background. This is, for example, a liquid jet in a supersonic flow. This is a metal powder production, which is basically from Nicholas Appel's thesis. And this is sheet atomization in a swirling flow from our group. And this is a 4 millimeter drop impact on a Mach 3 projectile. What all of this shows, these are droplets which are encountering high-speed flows, essentially. And some of them are shocks. And yeah, these three are shocks. This is not shock, but still fairly high speed to begin with. And there has been a lot of work that has been done on secondary atomization of droplets. In particular, you should look at this very famous paper by Jerry Faith, which was published in IEMSS, which basically shows that if you plot the Weber number and the Onsorge number map, what will happen is that regardless of the Onsorge number, the droplet, as you go on increasing the Weber number, shows different types of breakup. And those breakups are shown over here. It can be a bag breakup, it can be a bag and stamen breakup. It can be multi-bag breakup or shear stripping breakup or catastrophic breakup. Why we say catastrophic breakup, we do not have a clue. That is another way of saying we don't know what it is, right? But what Jerry Faith's work actually showed that up to about Onsorge number of about 0.1, you don't see any Onsorge number effect at all. The curve starts to curve up as you go on increasing the Onsorge number. So this begs the question that for high viscosity fluids, which is the new generation, say, slurry fluids, which is the new generation of polymeric fluids or polymeric liquids, this map does not exist. There are no universal correlations, right? So this is a fairly important stuff. And it can also happen in high pressure. High pressure situations also will be the same thing. So this is a still unanswered question in the literature as of now. All right. So we need, and also the data at high Weber number limits are not really readily available. As we know that in any case, when you study secondary breakup, there are three ways you can do it. One is a drop tower facility, one is a shock tube, and one is a droplet entrainment in a jet. So we have done all three at different points of time. But what we do not have is particularly Weber number, high Weber number limits, and what kind of breakup modes actually dominate. So for example, here, what Theophanes and others actually have showed that, okay, you have less than Weber number 100, you have these types of breakup. When you are in a transition mode, okay, you have a mixture. And in a shear induced entrainment mode starts happening at Weber number kind of greater than 1000. That is the current state of the art. This is what was seen. And still there is a lot of confusion in the types of breakup, which modes actually dominate in what way. There is a lot of these things. So we see limited literature, and we want to know what is the mechanism of droplet breakup and what is the role of surface instabilities, and the fundamental question is, can the results that we do for water can be translated to other liquid metals or to polymeric fluids? If there is a universality of that sort, then that would be a really nice game changer. All right. And of course, there is size measurements of atomized droplets also that forms an important part, which basically Jatin here actually did. That is because at this kind of fast phenomena or transient phenomena, measurement of droplet size becomes an onerous task. All right. So we are going to say that the fluid may be viscoelastic or polymers, it can be water, it can be liquid metal. We'll try to see if there is some underlying mechanism for the same. So for this, we use a shock tube. And this is not the shock tube that you will see in the aerospace department. This is a shock tube about this size, about half of my height, and I'm not tall. So what happens is that this shock tube actually uses a metal wire, which you basically explode. And that creates a blast wave, which you now use different contractions to make it planar. And your droplet is dropped either from a syringe at the top, or it is directed to an acoustic levitator. So in that way, you can get very high fidelity measurements on what is going on in the droplet, while avoiding all the complexities that are there in the case of a shock tube, which runs along the length of this room, essentially. So this is how it looks, essentially. So let's look at the parameters. So essentially, the shock Mach number is important, the Weber number is important. We tried what first EI water of different sizes, from 500 micron all the way up to about 3 mm in size. And in terms of shock Mach number, by changing the charging voltage, we went up to about a shock Mach number of about 2. Okay, you can go higher. The facility can go higher, but we did not try. We didn't want to, invite an explosion of any sort. Okay. And the Weber number accordingly, depending on different channel geometries and depending on the different diameters of the droplet, it can be, we go up to about 10 to the power of 4 and beyond. Okay. So this is very high Weber number limit to begin with. So these are the stages of the shock interaction. So you have this, you can see this is a shock wave, right? It passes by the droplet and you see nothing happens, right? You see the reflected wave and everything. Things start happening a little later, okay? So this is the flow that is generated by the shock, okay? So it is behind the shock, you start getting the droplet breakup phenomenon. For example, this one is a typical case of Rayleigh-Taylor piercing. You can see the stamen. And this is a case of shear-induced breakup. You can clearly see the droplet shearing out from there. Okay. So this is what happens in terms of the shock dynamics and the flow dynamics. Okay. So what happens when there is an incident shock? There is a transmitted wave inside. Transmitted wave ultimately forms the slip surface and the Mach stem. And then there is a focusing of the reflected expansion wave. Ultimately, this leads to a recirculation zone behind the droplet. This is what the shock does. In terms of the flow, as you can see, this is the flow field that is created around the droplet. And because of the pressure difference in the fore and the aft of the droplet, and because of the recirculation zone that is created, you get a flattening of the droplet initially. And you see these lips coming out at right about the equatorial region. That is what actually undergoes shear stripping. All right. So this is the phenomena in a nutshell, and this is the corresponding shivering image that shows the same. All right. So shock interaction initially is minimal on the breakup, but things starts to happen a little later compared to the shock. Let's look at this in details first. The first one is the shear-induced entrainment mode. So this is what you look at. This is roughly around Weber number of about 1300. Okay, so what you see initially, there is a flattening, there is a liquid sheet, and then this liquid sheet starts to strip. And then you get the final breakup. This is with time. Okay, and at a very high Weber number, this is close to 10,000. Okay, it's about 8,000 actually. So you can see that this modal characteristics remains kind of the same, but then it starts to atomize what we call catastrophically. Okay, it's very misty quality droplets we see. So what we have in the peripheral sheet is Kelvin-Helmholtz wave plus the droplet deformation. These are the two factors which leads to that. How do we know this? This clearly shows what is going on. Because if you do not really say, oh, this guy is talking about Kelvin-Helmholtz, where is the evidence for that? If you look at it carefully, you should be able to see the Kelvin-Helmholtz waves. This is extremely high fidelity images carried at two different Weber number values. All right. So there are many theories which says that why this lip actually forms within the droplet. Okay. One such theory which is advocated by us as well is because as the droplets gets flattened, there is a flow from the pole to the equator, liquid flow to the pole and the equator, which leads to this bulge, and this bulge ultimately atomizes. The kind of fingers comes out of this bulge and it atomizes. So that is the mechanism that we have kind of in the SIE. This is the shear induced entrainment mode of breakup. All right. So what you can do first, you can calculate this wavelength because we have such great images, and you can do a linear stability analysis on this. This, however, assumes that there is a step jump in the velocity from the liquid phase to the gas phase. And then you can do your standard dispersion equation. And it turns out that for different Weber number, the experimental data and this theoretical data do not match, right? So what we did immediately after this, because assumptions were these, we did immediately after this is we took into account what we call the vorticity layer thickness. It's essentially the boundary layer. Okay, so the velocity is actually relaxed and you match the velocity at the interface, but that matching happens over a certain length scale delta A, right? Once you put all these things now into consideration, okay, now if you plot the dispersion relationship, your experiment and the modeling results match to a fairly large extent. For this phenomena, which is as complicated as a shock hitting a droplet, this is, I would say, a pretty good match that we have been able to identify the critical wavelength. All right. So now the gauge instabilities and then the Rayleigh-Taylor modulation. So once you look at it, you will find that these are the gauge waves that are produced. Now, if you look at the droplet from the top, okay, top view, you see that there are RT waves which are produced over the gauge waves. So there is a modulation on the gauge waves, right? So it is like an add-on function over the gauge instability. And this is the top view actually proposes that. And we calculated both the experimental and the theoretical, and they match within a certain order, which is good in these kind of destructive breakup mechanism. This is quite a good agreement of the RT waves. All right. So we propose over here, if you look at these things very carefully, you will see that there is the shock droplet interaction. There is the initial deformation. The Rayleigh-Taylor piercing will lead to something like this. So if there is a deformation, and this will lead to that central stamen and two bags. Whereas in the shear induced breakup, you will have bulging of the equator, and then their waves will propagate, accumulate over here, and lead out as fingers. And the fingers actually show the typical Rayleigh-Taylor instability as the fingers come out and kind of destroy. So the idea was that is there a preferential mode of breakup, right? So we see that the big droplets undergo almost exclusively SIE mode of breakup, okay, bigger ones. While the smaller droplets show an RTP mode, particularly, that is the bag and stem. So is there a criteria that separates the two? So one thing one should kind of note that the growth rate of the shear-induced entrainment waves is always greater than the RTP. So it's an unequal race. The SIE always wins. Okay, the RTP is always slow. But if your droplet size is comparable to the size of the Kelvin-Helmholtz wave, that means the Kelvin-Helmholtz wave cannot fully form because your droplet is smaller in size than the Kelvin-Helmholtz wave. You will have a situation where the RTP mode is dominant. That is why we get it in smaller droplets and not in the bigger ones. Bigger ones are all dominated by the SIE mode. Okay, so this lays the foundation that what are the kind of modes that are available. So this can be now put in a nice little map, which actually shows the time, the different time, the breakup time, the induction time, and the breakup end time as a function of Weber number, right? So we know that how for water, these are all for water. We know that what are the stages that the droplet and how this transition phase actually happens, all right? So now shifting, we now know what is going on in the case of liquid water. Shift to liquid metal, okay? There is absolutely no literature available or very little literature, and there is absolutely no literature on Weber number greater than 100. Forget about the kind of Weber numbers we are dealing with. The idea was, can these results be translated to liquid metals? Very simple question. And there are, of course, compressible effects that changes atomization dynamics. So we used Galstein air and Galstein nitrogen. Remember that the density is roughly about 6.5 times higher. Viscosity is about 2.4, and the surface tension is a lot higher. It's 1 order higher. Okay, so these droplets are supposed to be more stable to begin with. This required the facility to be upgraded, because what happens in liquid metal, you form instantaneously form an oxide layer, which kind of encapsulates the liquid metal. So you need a nitrogen purge facility. Okay. And this is the same facility enclosed in a nitrogen purged chamber. It's an inert chamber, basically. So I'm going to skip this one. And so this is the Weber number. And this is for Galstein. You achieve it a little later. Just the simple reason of the higher surface tension of Galstein. So this is the curve for water. This is the curve for Galstein in air or nitrogen. Doesn't really matter. So if you look at the two views now, this is Galstein in air, this is Galstein in nitrogen, and this is your water. All of them are more or less at the same Weber number. All right. So now what you see is that when you are doing it with Galstein in air, you have this flaky type things coming out. That is because you form an oxide shell, and it is coming out like if you burst a balloon, for example, right? When you do it in nitrogen, that is largely suppressed, and you get this fine misty type droplets once again, and not the flakes. Now, if you compare this with water, you will see that there's a lot of similarities in atomization. Only thing is that the time scales and the other things could be a little off because of that. All right. You continue to do this, and if you show Galstein in air at different Weber number, for example, you see that even to go at this is very high Weber number, about 7,000. Still, we are getting this very flaky type of deposits. Okay, not like the catastrophic type that we are accustomed with. Now, if we now do this in Galstein nitrogen, you recover the very misty form of breakup, but still at high Weber number also, this is not as misty as water just because of the 1 order change in surface tension. Surface tension changes by 10 times. All right. So we then analyze the mechanism for Galstein air, and we found them, to cut a long story short, the mechanism is exactly the same. There's gauge waves that are produced. It leads to this flattening, and here from these views, you can really see that how this atomization actually takes place. Okay, so we were sure that the mechanism of breakup remains almost the same. We tried and measured, did the same, linear stability analysis on this. Again, we found a very good match. And we're going to skip this one and this one and this one, because this is not important. So liquid metal atomization, what we wanted to say is that the atomization mechanism remains the same, okay? And the Galstein oxidation results in flakes-like fragments. Apart from this, there is no other dissimilarities that normal surface tension increase cannot explain, all right? So then we moved on to polymeric fluid. Naveen is there, right? Yeah, so Naveen, this is Naveen's work. The previous two were Shubham's work. Now this is Naveen and Shubham combination. So the idea was very simple, that polymeric fluid is everywhere. I think Balachandra showed that when you spit, you get all this, in the saliva, which is basically like this, okay, published in Experiments in Fluids. And essentially the thing is exactly the same. It can be used for metal, it can be used for, say, fruit pulp or pharmaceutical chemicals, which are largely viscoelastic in nature. All right. So this is what happened. This is water. Once again, look at it carefully. This is a polymeric droplet. Okay. So you see this jellyfish type patterns and long ligaments that are coming out of this. Okay. Now here the story gets a little bit convoluted. This is because of polymer. Okay. They have elasticity, right? So what happens is that even if we change, and this is basically the characterization of the polymer, but this is not where the story lies. So if you go from DI water, and as you go on increasing the polymer concentration, right? You can see that we go from a catastrophic type breakup all the way to very suppressed breakup, even more suppressed. And when the polymer concentration is really high, it does not break up at all. It forms this kind of sheet, which kind of, floats like a plastic bag, essentially. Right. All right. So this is what happens in this case also. And there is a long story behind it also. We have a deformation of the droplet. And if the Weber number is low, you have flattening of the drop. And then you get vibrational mode of breakup. Vibrational means really low Weber number breakup. When you have moderate Weber number, you have this cage waves once again dominating. And when you have really high Weber number, you have cage and RT waves together that dominate. And ultimately, it leads to the final morphology, which is basically a sheet, ligaments, this is beads on a string, this is daughter droplets, and this is catastrophic breakup. This is what you get in a polymeric fluid. All right? And this is basically the same thing. You can see the vibrational mode on the top, then you can see the more catastrophic breakup at the bottom. All right? So once again, you find we wanted to look at, now that we are dealing with a polymeric fluid, what is the difference? So in the deformation stage, we found that there is no role of liquid elasticity at all. The phenomena is so fast. All right. Then we looked at the cage instability part. And then you measure the cage wavelengths and you do the dispersion analysis. And you also infer that whatever is the polymer, whatever is the elasticity of the polymer, it has absolutely no effect on the wavelength of the cage waves. Right. So this brings now, then if you look at the same thing with the RT waves now, and these are again dispersion relationships, again we find that the liquid elasticity has got no role in determining the wavelength of the RT instability. So that means whatever we say for water, whatever we say for liquid metal, that is exactly valid for polymeric fluid as well, right? Up to this stage, there is no role of elasticity. Great. So, but now this map becomes important. However, the final topology, that means the breakup topology. So what I'm trying to say is that the droplet first deforms, then you have the cage waves, and then you have the RT waves. So this instability generation mechanisms remains the same. But the output of that mechanism varies quite a bit. That means, for example, as you go on increasing the Weber number, you get a lot of misty type of a droplet. As you go on increasing the elasticity number, what you have is that you have more stabilization of these ligaments and the sheets that you form. So cage has done his bit, RT has done its bit, the flow has done its bit. Is the elasticity which tries to pull back and ultimately regulate the final morphology or the topology of the final outcome. Okay. So once you know this, okay, then you know exactly what kind of mode of breakup that you can expect to come out of it. Okay. You can put all of this now in a fantastic map. So this is basically time, that is elasticity number, this is Weber number. So up to this point, all the lines are basically the same. Okay, there is no difference, there is no bifurcation. As you go on here, this starts to bifurcate. So when you get these kind of morphologies at the end of the day, right, due to the inception of all these mechanisms, that is cage, RT, and all these things, this now requires analysis. And this is where, as I told my students also, this is where pattern recognition or your AI and ML will come in very handy. Okay. Not only that, the droplets that are generated out of this, out of all this breakup at the final stage, those droplets size measurement, all size and velocity measurements becomes extremely important. So that's why with Professor Tropia, Jatin, and Shubham, before that, they developed the depth from deep focus technique to measure the droplet sizes, essentially coming out of events which are as catastrophic as this. All right. So this is roughly, this is the cover art that was, chosen, from that. Okay. How much time do I have? 2 minutes? 3 minutes? You have more. Okay. Then I can go a little bit more. Okay. And I show something that why stop at only droplets? Because there is a lot of literature, there is a lot of need in hypersonics, for example, or supersonic combustion, where your droplet flame actually encounters a shock, right? So why not look at something like shock flame interaction? This is the work of Gautam and Akhil. Where is Akhil? I don't see him clearly. Or is he around? Okay. So we took the same setup. Okay. This is yet unpublished. So this is to be published actually. So what happens over here is that you can use the same technology without the tube. So it creates a spherically expanding front and your droplet is applied there and it interacts with the droplet flame. Or you can use these contractions, big or small, and you can kind of direct and focus the shock on the droplet, right? And there are many variations of this we did. For example, Akhil has done some work on this premixed flame and non-premixed flame and how it encounters the shock. Jatin has done or is doing how a column of liquid actually atomizes in these contexts. Forget about all these numbers. Just look at some of the pretty pictures once again over here. So this is the blast wave. Again, there is a decaying velocity behind the blast wave, which actually leads to this vertical formation. Okay, and that is what actually interacts with the drop. As simple as that. So you can have different Mach numbers, all are above 1. So big channel, small channel, open channel, all kinds of configurations. So this is what happens. If you see, this is small channel, free field, big channel. So you can see first, if the video replays once again, you see first, the flame is lifted, and then the backflow actually atomizes the droplet. Okay. Let's look at it here. The flame tip just moves free field. It's a very weak front now. The flame just perturbs, goes up, reignites and comes down and attaches over here. And here you can see the flame tip and the base is continuously moved downstream because of the bulk flow, right? So these are with different, strengths of the shock. Okay. You can watch the same thing that it is basically, it ultimately boils down to how a plane interacts with the vortex. It's like a vortex ring. If you kind of, take the problem and reduce it to the bare minimum, this is what exactly actually happens. All right. So, so in other words, if I just showed 2 or 3 slides, there are more in the interest of time. So what happens when you have an open blast wave, that is, there is no section, you have the flame shock interaction, and then you have a flame jet interaction. And the flame jet interaction ultimately leads to either reignition or blowout of the flame. All right. When you have a higher Mach number with a focusing blast wave, you have a flame liftoff and partial extinction, and then you have a droplet vortex interaction after that, ultimately leading to droplet breakup. So this phenomena is a sequential time phenomena. First, the shock comes and lifts the flame or modulates the flame. Second, the flow comes. Flow also interacts with the flame, and if it is strong enough, it will atomize the droplet using some of the same mechanisms that he showed earlier, right? So this can happen in any type of supersonic applications that we are talking about, right? And this is fundamentally important because there has been absolutely no work in this field, no work, okay, on this things, okay? So few of the people, these are all the IGSCC team actually, okay, who participated and did all the work. And there are actually 3 JFMs that came out of it. And so, I mean, whatever the droplet shock work presented were all in JFM, and a few others are coming up in other journals as we speak. So I finished on time.
Yes, thank you. Okay, great. The top is open for questions. Okay. Any questions? I think Cam has asked all his questions. So that is one problem.
I think he knows the work.
Yeah, I mean, just to get people wake up. I have a few questions, but I'm just looking around. Is there anybody? Okay.
So do you also vary Reynolds number in your experiments?
Reynolds number is automatically auto-determined. Correct me guys if I'm wrong, right? It's auto-determined by how much voltage you do and how you blast it. So there is really not much of a control, okay, on the Weber number per se, on the velocity per se. Yeah.
When the metal atomization results and the liquid water atomization results were brought on the same page again, then Reynolds number was playing some role.
Yeah.
So, but most of it is determined using Weber.
There is no way to keep Weber fixed and vary Reynolds in the experiment.
It can be done.
We can it in the continuous flow facility, obviously.
Yeah, you can add maybe surfactants to change the surface tension. It can be done in that way, or by choosing a different liquid and then changing your flow rate. It's
So
just
that is
like
the
you have to
properties
change the.
part. What we are talking about, that we also have the continuous flow part. There, of course, your Reynolds number and Weber number
Just
both
for
can be independently vary.
Just in the metal and liquid water, when the surface tension was like order of magnitude different. So to get the same Weber number, the Reynolds number, if you evaluate, will be much higher for the metal
Yes.
atomization one. But the qualitative features look same when we break everything in the Weber.
The idea was that the mechanisms do not really change much, because of course we cannot match the exact values. That's why you see odd numbers like 1317 and 1408 and all these things. Otherwise, we would have 1300, 1400, 970. But you are, but the feeling is within a particular range of Weber number, well, things are kind of all good. Even if you look at Jelly Tate's map, it was Weber number with Onsorge that map. Okay, because Onsorge number, Weber number, Reynolds number can be combined to get, for example, Onsorge number. So it's kind of things. We might stick to that.
So it was a very nice presentation. I must say, there were too many shocks involved. And
That's why it was a shocking story.
yes, yes. I am Husru Kumardi. I am doing my PhD at IIT Roper. I am also working in this aqueous polymer solution somehow.
Okay.
In my work, I saw, because there were a lot of filaments that were coming. I'm working in a little bit controlled environment, maybe not that spatially movements,
No.
drop impact on superhydrophobic surfaces. So was there any point where you could have quantified the way or any effect in which this stiffening of these polymer filaments made any distinguishable?
This phenomena is so fast, rapid.
And it's moving also.
And it's moving.
Not,
Okay, moving, okay, I mean, yes, I mean, it can be, of course, you can, I mean, the total time involved is of the order of a few milliseconds. So ideally, it's polymer stiffening and other things may not happen within that time. Naveen, correct me if I'm wrong, or, you know, if you have a different opinion, but we don't see that, do we?
Because if it's not breaking, then it's due.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, we see it in static capillary better.
So if you just pull it,
maybe if the shock tube would have been invisible and we could have a light over that and you could see from front, you could have seen something, but it's there. Maybe another graduate student can work on a technique to see from the front. So
Oh, yeah.
get an
why
idea.
not?
But
Why
it's very nice presentation. I've been seeing these images on LinkedIn for a very long time.
Okay,
I'm
good.
glad to see you presentation.
Good.
This will keep.
Okay, you are.
So
This one is.
now you are bringing me back to Alexian again. You know.
Yes.
So anytime you see these filaments forming, that's a reflection that your polymer filaments have been stretched. And because this is happening really fast, it doesn't have time to break up. So when you see the strands, that's when your rubber cords are stretched. Yeah. So you actually see it. Correct. Yes. So the reason, well, the real way to check that would be if you had multiple polymer concentrations and so on and so on.
So that static capillary, what Naveen has, when it moves it nicely and it's, you know, in a slow
That's where it
pattern,
comes.
you will see that. It's more understandable there.
Okay, any other question? I will teach a non-Newtonian fluid mechanics course in my life someday. I don't know. I don't have time. Any other question? Yes, please.
So with this high Mach number, the pH instability should be very higher than.
Oh, okay,
Uh,
wonderful.